The Silk Road was once a place where legends were made until the 1500s or so, and then Columbus came along and ruined everything, or improved it if you're the half-glass full type of person. Before Europeans found an all-water route to connect Europe and Asia, people had to transport their goods the old-fashioned way, by camel. The Silk Road spanned 6,200 miles of some of the roughest, bandit-infested terrain on the planet. But the profits were high, and so the risk was worth it, especially if you were rich enough to pay someone to do the traveling for you. The Silk Road inspired stories of wealthy merchants, deadly bandits, fabulous cities, ghosts, genies, and the explorers and merchants who traveled these ancient roads, all for one thing: to get stinking rich. The Silk Road itself is a bit of an enigma. For starters, it's not just one road, but a collection of hundreds of roads and camel tracks that connected the cities of Asia with the cities of Africa and Europe. Secondly, the Silk Road was not always even on the land, because merchants had to deal with things such as freak storms, crossing vast deserts, climbing treacherous mountains, all while avoiding bandits who are looking to relieve you of some of that precious cargo. Many merchants chose to sail along the coast of Asia and take their chances with bad-tempered sea gods. A Chinese merchant starting off in Shanghai could stock up on all of the supplies needed for a journey that could take 6 months or more, depending on how far he was willing to travel. Typically, the further a merchant traveled, the more profits he could keep for himself, and the greater the risk of something going terribly wrong. Only a small percentage of merchants tried to make the entire 4,000-mile journey. Before starting off, a merchant would have to buy camels, axes, rope, cloth, salted meats, and vegetables that were preserved to resist spoiling in the days before refrigerator, In Chang'an, a merchant would also load up on goods that would fetch the highest price along the way. The ideal trade good should be lightweight to reduce the number of pack animals and rare to fetch the highest price. Chinese artisans may not have had high status in ancient China, but it was their work that made the Silk Road worth the risk. China became famous for its iron and bronze work, finely decorated lacquer boxes, bamboo products, and the most highly prized of all, silk. Here's a riddle for you. What weighs less than 5 pounds but was powerful enough to defeat an entire Roman legion? Well, according to one story, that secret weapon was silk. A silk flag, to be exact. The story tells us that the Romans were about to engage the Persians in battle near modern-day Baghdad when the enemy unfurled a strange banner of cloth that you could see through. The Romans, being a very superstitious people, took this as a sign of strong magical forces and decided to turn tail rather than stand and fight. No one knows if this story is true, but it is fun to think of the thought that the tough Roman army running from a piece of cloth. What we do know is that once the Romans learned of the existence of silk, they couldn't get enough of it. Silk was so expensive that even the wealthiest Romans could only afford to sew a strip of silk into their tunics. Some Roman emperors even passed laws forbidding anyone but the elite from wearing silk. The most expensive silk was dyed purple, and thus reserved only for the emperor himself. This is why purple became the color for European royalty. The finest silk comes from the silkworms produced by the bombyx moth. The moth cannot fly nor can it see. Its only job is to lay eggs. One moth will lay approximately 500 eggs over a 4 to 6 day period. Soon after that, the moth dies. It takes around 30,000 silkworms to produce 12 pounds of raw silk. Silk was the epitome of luxury back in ancient times. After all, it had a whole trade route named after it. The story of silk is wrapped in mystery itself. According to legend, the Chinese princess Shi Ling Zai was drinking a cup of hot tea under a mulberry tree when a silkworm cocoon fell into her cup. When she unraveled the cocoon, one of the world's greatest secrets had been revealed. Silk making was a well-guarded secret for the next 2,000 years. Anyone who let this secret slip could face the death penalty. This threat worked pretty well because it wasn't until after the Middle Ages that Europeans began to learn how to manufacture their own silk. Legend has it that the secret of silk escaped China when another Chinese princess smuggled cocoons out of the country with her whenever she married a foreign prince. She did this by hiding them in her elaborate hairdo. Traveling west from Chang'an, a caravan heads towards the Gansu Corridor, a 600-mile stretch of some of the most difficult terrain along the Silk Road. The Gansu Corridor is the wild west of China. Caravans of up to 100 merchants would group together for protection and to increase the odds of surviving one of the harshest stretches of terrain in Asia. To south of the Gansu Corridor is the mountainous Tibetan Plateau. To the north lies the Gobi Desert. Merchant caravans would follow the mighty Yellow River for many miles and then head north away from the mountains to follow a string of oases that dot the desert. The desert itself was a challenge with scarce water, flash flooding from sudden thunderstorms, and extreme temperatures that could range from 130 degrees Fahrenheit in the day to a brisk 50 degrees at night. Caravans navigated by the stars, and after Han times, the Chinese came up with another way of finding their way, the magnetic compass. However, getting sunburned and lost were not the only worries a caravan faced. Bandits often roamed these remote regions looking to relieve some of the valuable cargo of silk, spices, and gems that merchants transported. Merchants often traveled in large, heavily armed groups. Some even hired professional soldiers for added muscle. The goal of most merchants was the Jade Gate, the most western point in ancient China, just west of the town of Dongheng, which was an important town to resupply. Before making this 1,000-mile journey, the caravan would make a stop at the military outpost of Zhaiyongjun, marking the end of the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall itself reflects the long history of China and its constant battle against the nomadic tribes that led raids on the Chinese settlement that existed in the fringes of the empire.